The first time I realized how much I was willing to sacrifice for my husband, I was sitting in a hospital room with my hand wrapped around his. He looked exhausted, pale, and frightened, and I remember thinking that I would give him anything if it meant keeping him alive. At that moment, I didn't care about the money we had spent, the plans we had cancelled, or the future we had imagined. I only cared about one thing. He was sick, and I was the person who could possibly save him. We had been married for almost 8 years. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but I had always believed that we were the kind of couple who would stand beside each other when life became difficult. We had survived arguments, financial problems, family disagreements, and all the ordinary pressures that slowly test a marriage. There were times when we had felt distant, but whenever something serious happened, we always came back to each other. Then his kidneys began failing. At first, he complained about being tired. I thought he was working too much. He had started coming home late, sleeping longer than usual, and losing his appetite. When he began experiencing swelling in his legs, I insisted that he see a doctor. He kept telling me it was nothing serious, but eventually the tests came back. I still remember the doctor's expression. He didn't look shocked. He looked concerned in the quiet, professional way doctors do when they already know the news they're about to deliver will change someone's life. My husband's kidney function was dangerously low. I remember staring at the doctor, waiting for him to say there was another explanation. Maybe the tests were wrong. Maybe there was medication. Maybe surgery could fix everything. But the doctor explained that his condition was advanced and that without a suitable donor, his health could deteriorate rapidly. My husband looked at me. Neither of us spoke. Then the doctor mentioned transplantation. I didn't even let him finish. I'll get tested. My husband immediately shook his head. No. I looked at him. Why not? Because I won't let you do that. I remember feeling almost angry at him. You're my husband. He looked down at his hands. I don't want you risking your health for me. At the time, I thought those words proved how much he loved me. I didn't realize later they would become some of the most painful words I had ever remembered. The tests began almost immediately. Blood work, scans, consultations, psychological evaluations. Every appointment made the situation feel more real. Eventually, the doctors confirmed that I was a suitable donor. When they gave me the news, I felt strangely relieved. I could help him. I could actually do something. My husband hugged me tightly that night. He cried against my shoulder and kept saying he didn't deserve me. I told him he didn't need to say that. Marriage wasn't about keeping score. If one person fell, the other helped them stand. At least, that's what I believed. The weeks leading up to the surgery were difficult. I had never undergone a major operation before, and the doctors explained everything carefully. There were risks. There would be pain. Recovery would take time. I would have to change certain aspects of my lifestyle, attend follow-up appointments, and monitor my remaining kidney. I understood all of it. And still, I wasn't afraid. Whenever fear appeared, I would look at my husband and imagine a future where he was healthy again. I imagined us walking through our neighborhood, taking vacations, growing old together. I imagined this whole nightmare becoming nothing more than a painful chapter we would eventually talk about. But something changed in him during those final weeks. He became quieter. At first, I thought he was scared. Then I noticed he had started guarding his phone. Before his illness, he would leave his phone on the kitchen counter or beside the television. Suddenly, it was always in his pocket. If he went into another room, he took it with him. If someone called while I was nearby, he would sometimes decline the call and say it was work. I noticed, but I didn't accuse him. I told myself he was under pressure. There were moments when I caught him staring at his phone with an expression I couldn't understand. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't relief. It looked like fear. Whenever I asked what was wrong, he would smile and say, "Nothing. I'm just nervous about the surgery." I believed him. Because I loved him. The night before the operation, I barely slept. I lay beside him listening to his breathing. At one point, he reached for my hand in the darkness. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "About what?" "About doing this." I turned toward him. If I had to make the decision again, I'd still do it. He squeezed my hand. "You don't know how much this means to me." I smiled. "I know." I thought those would become beautiful memories. Instead, they became memories I would later question over and over again. The morning of the surgery arrived faster than I expected. The hospital was unusually quiet. Nurses moved through the halls, checking charts and preparing equipment. My husband had already been admitted, and I was being prepared separately. Everything felt strangely normal. Too normal. Then, about 40 minutes before I was supposed to be taken into the operating room, my husband's phone rang. He was sitting beside me. The sound cut through the quiet room. He looked at the screen. And everything about his face changed. His eyes widened. His breathing stopped for a second. Then he stood up so quickly that the chair moved backward. "Who is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. He stared at the screen as if he had just received the worst news imaginable. The phone continued ringing. I looked at him. "Are you going to answer?" He finally did. But he didn't say hello. He simply listened. I watched his expression change from fear to confusion, then something that looked almost like desperation. After less than 30 seconds, he ended the call. "Who was that?" "Nobody." I frowned. "Nobody?" "Wrong number." He slipped the phone into his pocket. I didn't believe him. But before I could ask another question, a nurse entered the room and told me they were ready to begin preparing me for surgery. I looked at my husband. He smiled, but it was different now. Forced. I reached for his hand. He held mine. And for the last time before everything changed, I told myself that I trusted him completely. 40 minutes later, I would be lying on an operating table, preparing to give this man a part of my own body. And I had no idea that the phone call I had just witnessed was the first crack in the story he had been telling me. A story I had believed with my whole heart. A story that was about to fall apart. The nurse had barely finished checking my blood pressure when I heard my husband's phone vibrate again. This time, he didn't answer it. He simply stared at the screen. I was lying on the hospital bed, still trying to convince myself that the strange phone call from 40 minutes earlier had been nothing. A wrong number. A work problem. Something unrelated to me. But the look on his face made that impossible. "Your phone is ringing again," I said. He picked it up quickly. "It's nothing." "Then answer it." He looked at me. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he turned away from me and stepped toward the window. That small movement bothered me more than the call itself. My husband had never behaved like that around me. He had always been open with his phone. I knew his password. He knew mine. We never had a reason to hide anything. But now he was standing with his back toward me, speaking quietly. I couldn't hear the person on the other end. I could only hear fragments. "No. You don't understand. Not now." Then he lowered his voice even further. I watched him through the reflection in the window. He looked terrified. When he finally ended the call, he turned around and saw me watching him. "What?" he asked. "Who was that?" "Nobody." "You said that before." He sighed. "I told you. It's nothing." I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to. Because in less than an hour, I was supposed to undergo surgery to give him one of my kidneys. The idea that there could be something wrong between us at that exact moment felt almost unbearable. So I chose the explanation that hurt the least. He was scared. He was sick. Maybe he was simply overwhelmed. Then his phone lit up again. This time, I saw the message preview before he could turn the screen away. There were only a few words. "You promised me you wouldn't let her do it." My heart stopped. I looked at him. He looked at the phone. Then at me. "What does that mean?" He immediately locked the screen. "It doesn't mean anything." "Who said that?" "No one important." I pushed myself slightly upright. "Then why would someone say I shouldn't do it?" He didn't answer. "Who is it?" "Please." His voice changed. It wasn't angry. It was frightened. "Please don't do this right now." I stared at him. "Don't do what?" "Question me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I'm about to give you my kidney." "I know." "I'm about to have surgery." "I know." "And you're telling me not to ask who is sending you messages saying I shouldn't?" He rubbed his face. "You don't understand what's happening." "Then explain it." He looked toward the door. For the first time since we had arrived at the hospital, I felt like I was standing on the outside of something. Something he had been keeping from me. He finally said, "It's complicated." I almost laughed. "Complicated?" He looked at me. "I'll explain everything after the surgery." Those words frightened me. "Why after?" "Because right now you need to focus on yourself." "No," I said quietly. "I need to know the truth before I let someone cut me open." He didn't respond. The silence between us became unbearable. Then a nurse entered and told me the surgical team was ready. My husband immediately stepped toward me. "Don't worry," he said. But I pulled my hand away. "Who is she?" He froze. I hadn't even known why I asked that. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the certainty that the person behind those messages was a woman. His face gave me the answer before his mouth did. "You're imagining things." That wasn't an answer. He looked away. I felt something inside me breaking. Not because I had proof of an affair. I didn't. Not yet. It was because I suddenly realized that I had been protecting his feelings while he had been protecting a secret. The nurse asked me to follow her. As I was being wheeled toward the operating area, I looked back at him. He stood in the hallway. He wasn't crying. He wasn't smiling. He was staring at me like someone watching a decision he could no longer control. Then his phone rang again. He looked down. This time, he answered immediately. I couldn't hear what the person said. But I saw my husband's face collapse. He leaned against the wall. And then I heard him whisper something. "No. She can't know." Those 5 words followed me into the operating room. I tried to push them away. I tried to tell myself I had misunderstood. But when I was lying beneath the bright surgical lights, surrounded by doctors and nurses, I couldn't stop thinking about that message. "You promised me you wouldn't let her do it." Who was her? Why didn't someone want me to donate my kidney? And why had my husband promised someone that he wouldn't let me? The questions kept circling through my mind. Then, just before the anesthesia began, one of the nurses checked my chart and paused. She looked at me. Then at the chart. Then back at me. "Are you sure you want to proceed?" My heart began pounding. "Yes." She nodded, but something about her expression stayed with me. I closed my eyes. I wanted to trust my husband. I wanted to believe that everything had a reasonable explanation. But somewhere deep inside, a voice was telling me that I had just crossed a line I could never uncross. The surgery began. When I woke up, everything felt heavy. My body hurt. My throat was dry. My mind was foggy. But the first thought that entered my head wasn't about the pain. It was my husband. I looked around the room. He wasn't there. A nurse told me he had gone home to rest. I accepted that explanation. For a few minutes. Then I noticed something on the small table beside my bed. My phone. There was a message from an unknown number. My hands were shaking as I opened it. There was no greeting. No explanation. Just one sentence. You almost died for a man who never told you why he needed your kidney. I stared at the screen. My entire body went cold. Then another message appeared. This one contained a photograph. It was my husband, sitting across from a woman in a restaurant. And the date on the photograph was from 3 weeks before my surgery. 3 weeks before he told me he was too sick to leave the house. I stared at the picture until the words on the screen blurred through my tears. For the first time, I understood that the phone call 40 minutes before my surgery hadn't been a coincidence. Someone had been trying to warn me. And somehow, I had ignored the warning. Because I loved him too much to imagine that the man I was willing to sacrifice a part of myself for might be the very person who had been lying to me all along. For the first few hours after the surgery, I tried to convince myself that the photograph didn't mean what I thought it meant. I stared at it again and again, searching for some innocent explanation. Maybe the woman was a doctor. Maybe she was a relative. Maybe there was something about that meeting I didn't understand. I wanted there to be another explanation because the alternative was too painful to accept. My body was weak, but my mind wouldn't rest. The message from the unknown number remained open on my phone. You almost died for a man who never told you why he needed your kidney. I kept reading that sentence. Then I looked at the photograph. My husband was sitting across from a woman in an expensive restaurant. He wasn't smiling, but he looked perfectly healthy. There was no hospital bracelet on his wrist. No sign that he was the weak, exhausted man I had watched struggle for weeks. The date was 3 weeks before my surgery. I remembered that day. He had told me he felt too sick to go anywhere. He had stayed home while I went grocery shopping. I had even called him from the store to ask if he needed anything. He told me he was sleeping. But the photograph showed him somewhere else. With her. I felt my stomach tighten. I wanted to call him immediately, but my fingers were trembling too badly. Instead, I replied to the unknown number. Who are you? The message was seen almost instantly. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the person typed. Someone who tried to stop this before it happened. My heart began beating faster. What do you mean? No response. I waited. Then another message arrived. Ask your husband about the tests from 6 weeks ago. I stared at the screen. The tests. 6 weeks ago. That was when we had first learned how serious his kidney problem supposedly was. I remembered the day clearly. He had come home from the hospital and told me the doctors had discovered that his kidneys were failing rapidly. He had looked devastated. I had cried with him. I had held him and promised that we would face it together. But now someone was telling me to question the tests. I didn't know what to believe. My husband finally arrived later that afternoon. The moment he walked through the door, I studied his face. He smiled. How are you feeling? I almost laughed. How was I feeling? I had just given him one of my kidneys. My body hurt. My marriage felt like it was collapsing. And I had a photograph on my phone that suggested he had lied to me. But I simply asked, where were you 3 weeks ago? His smile disappeared. What? 3 weeks ago. On Tuesday. He looked confused for a moment. Why? You told me you were home. I was. I turned my phone toward him. The photograph was still on the screen. His face went completely blank. For several seconds, he didn't speak. That silence told me more than any confession could have. Who is she? I whispered. He sat down. She's someone I know. That's not an answer. I didn't want to tell you because you were already under so much stress. So you lied? He rubbed his forehead. It wasn't what you think. Then tell me what it was. He looked at the floor. She knows about my medical situation. I felt a chill run through me. Why would she know about your medical situation? He didn't answer. I asked again. Why? Finally, he said, because she helped me. The words hit me harder than I expected. Helped you with what? He looked at me. I can't explain everything right now. I stared at him. You keep saying that. I promise I'll tell you. When? Soon. I shook my head. No. Not soon. Now. He became defensive. You just had surgery. You need rest. And you need to stop treating me like I'm too fragile to know what you did. His expression changed. For the first time, I saw something that looked like guilt. But guilt wasn't proof. I needed facts. The next morning, while my husband was asleep in the chair beside my bed, I asked the nurse if I could see my medical records. She hesitated. Your records? Yes. I want to understand the timeline of his condition. She looked at me carefully. You should speak with the doctor. I will. But I want to see what I signed. Eventually, I was given access to the relevant documents. I read them slowly. My eyes moved across the dates. Blood tests. Imaging. Consultations. Then I noticed something. One of the earliest test results was not as severe as my husband had described. It showed kidney impairment, but it didn't match the emergency he had made it sound like. I called the doctor. Can you explain this? He looked at the report. This result was concerning, but it wasn't the final assessment. What happened afterward? There were additional tests. Can I see them? He hesitated. Some of the records were submitted by another facility. Another facility. My heart started racing. Which one? He gave me the name. I recognized it immediately. It was the same medical center listed on one of the bills I had seen at home. The same bill my husband had told me was simply an old consultation. Now I understood why he had become uncomfortable whenever I asked about it. That evening, I searched through the documents he had left in his bag. I wasn't looking for evidence of an affair anymore. I was looking for medical information. And that's when I found something that changed everything. A copy of a medical report. The date was from before he told me he needed a transplant. I read it once. Then again. My hands began shaking. The report suggested that his condition required further evaluation, but it didn't say what he had told me. It didn't say that his life depended immediately on receiving my kidney. It didn't say that I was his only chance. I sat there staring at the paper. The man I had trusted had taken a medical problem and turned it into an emergency in my mind. But why? Why would someone convince his wife to undergo major surgery if it wasn't absolutely necessary? Then my phone vibrated. Another message. This time, there was no photograph. Only words. Now ask him about the woman in the restaurant. I looked toward the door. My husband was standing there. He had seen the message. His face went pale. You've been talking to someone. It wasn't a question. I slowly put my phone down. Yes. He walked toward me. Who? I don't know. He stopped. What do you mean, you don't know? I don't know who they are. But they know things about you. He stared at me. Then I asked the question that I had been afraid to ask since the beginning. Are you actually as sick as you told me? His eyes filled with tears. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "You don't understand." I looked at him. "Then make me understand." He sat beside the bed. His voice was barely audible. "There are things I didn't tell you." I felt my heart sink. "How many?" He closed his eyes. "Too many." And in that moment, I realized the woman in the photograph might not be the biggest secret he had been hiding. She might only be the person standing closest to the truth. Because whatever my husband had done, it had started long before that phone rang 40 minutes before my surgery. And now I needed to know why he had been so desperate for me to believe that saving his life was the only choice I had. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same things again. The phone ringing, the message on the screen, the photograph of my husband sitting across from another woman, and the medical report that didn't match the story he had told me. But the worst part wasn't knowing that he had lied. It was not knowing how far the lie went. My husband sat beside my hospital bed for most of the night. He barely spoke. Whenever I looked at him, he looked away. Finally, sometime after midnight, I asked, "How long have you been planning this?" He looked at me. "Planning what?" "This." I touched the bandage covering my surgical wound. "Me giving you my kidney." His face tightened. "I never planned for you to get hurt." "That isn't what I asked." He lowered his eyes. I waited. After several seconds, he said, "I was scared." "Of what?" "Losing everything." I stared at him. "You were afraid of losing your life." He shook his head. "No." That answer made my blood run cold. He looked at me again. "I was afraid of losing my life as I knew it." I didn't understand. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. I pushed myself higher against the pillows. "You told me your kidneys were failing. You told me you needed a transplant. You made me believe that if I didn't donate, you could die. You could have died too." "I know." "Then why are you acting like I wanted this?" "Because you never told me the whole truth." His eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know how." "Try." He sat there silently. Then he finally began talking. The woman in the photograph was named Claire. She had known him before we met. Not just casually. They had been involved in a relationship years earlier. My stomach turned. "So you were having an affair?" "No." I stared at him. "You were meeting your former girlfriend while telling me you were too sick to leave the house." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" "She contacted me after she found out about my condition." I almost laughed. "Your condition?" "Yes." "What did she want?" "She knew something about my medical history." "What?" He hesitated. "She knew my original diagnosis wasn't as serious as I told you." The room became completely silent. I felt as if the air had disappeared. "So you admit it?" He looked down. I exaggerated. Exaggerated? I could barely get the word out. "You made me believe I was going to lose my husband." "I was sick. But not dying." He didn't answer. I felt tears running down my face. "You let me go through surgery because you were afraid to lose your life as you knew it?" He shook his head. "It wasn't only that." "Then what?" He looked terrified. "She found out about the debt." "What debt?" He closed his eyes. I knew immediately that this was the part he had been trying to hide. He owed money. A lot of it. Not medical bills. Personal debts. He had borrowed money from people I didn't know. He had made investments without telling me. Some had failed. Others had left him trapped in contracts and obligations. He was drowning financially. And he believed that if his medical condition became serious enough, insurance and financial assistance would protect him from losing everything. But there was more. He had also discovered that I was a compatible donor. At first, he had refused. He told me he couldn't ask me to do it. But someone had convinced him that if I volunteered, he could avoid other consequences. I stared at him in disbelief. So you didn't ask me because you loved me? I did love you. Then why? Because I was desperate. That word stayed between us. Desperate. He wasn't asking me to forgive him. He was trying to explain why he had destroyed my trust. I asked him about the mysterious messages. He finally admitted that Claire had been sending them. She had discovered the truth and tried to stop the surgery. She told you not to let me do it. He nodded. Why? Because she knew what I had done. And she was trying to save me? Yes. I looked toward the window. The woman I had assumed was the enemy had been the one trying to warn me. That realization hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. Then I remembered something. The message said, "You promised me you wouldn't let her do it." What promise? He didn't answer. Tell me. He finally whispered, "I promised Claire that I would tell you the truth before the surgery." My heart dropped. But you didn't. No. Why? Because I knew you would walk away. I stared at him. So you chose to let me sacrifice an organ rather than risk losing me. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. I thought I could fix everything afterward. I shook my head. You don't fix this afterward. He reached for my hand. I pulled it away. That was the first time in 8 years that I deliberately refused his touch. He looked devastated. But I couldn't feel sorry for him anymore. Not then. Not after what I had done. I had spent weeks preparing myself for pain because I believed love demanded sacrifice. But he had taken that belief and used it against me. Then I asked the question that had been haunting me since the beginning. Why did you need my kidney if your condition wasn't that severe? His face changed. And I knew there was still something he hadn't told me. He took his phone from his pocket. His hands were shaking. There was another reason. What? He opened a message. I read it. It was from someone whose name I didn't recognize. The message said, "If she donates, everything stays hidden. If she doesn't, the investigation continues, ****. I looked at him. What investigation? He didn't speak. What's being investigated? He finally said the words. Financial fraud. I felt numb. My husband hadn't only been hiding debt. He had been hiding something potentially criminal. He had used his medical situation as a shield while trying to protect himself from an investigation. And somehow, my kidney had become part of that plan. I couldn't breathe. Then his phone vibrated again. Another message appeared. This time, it wasn't from Claire. It was from a number I recognized. The message contained a single sentence. You need to know what he planned to do after your surgery. I looked at my husband. He saw the message too. And the color drained from his face. What did you plan to do? He didn't answer. Tell me. He stared at the floor. Finally, he whispered. I was going to leave. My heart shattered. Leave me? Yes. After I gave you my kidney? He began crying. I thought I could start over. I stared at him for several seconds. Then I realized something more painful than all the lies. He had never planned to grow old with me. He had planned to use my love to survive his crisis and then disappear once the danger was gone. The surgery wasn't the beginning of our tragedy. It was the moment I finally discovered the truth. And somewhere inside me, the woman who had entered that hospital believing love meant giving everything was beginning to understand something she should have known much earlier. Love can ask you to sacrifice. But it should never ask you to surrender your dignity, your trust, and your entire life to someone who has already decided to betray you. I looked at my husband and waited for him to say something that could make any of it make sense. He didn't. He sat there with his head lowered, his hands trembling slightly, as if he had finally run out of explanations. I was going to leave, he had admitted. Those 4 words kept repeating inside my head. I had given him a part of my body because I believed we were building a future together. He had been planning a future without me. The realization was strangely quiet. There was no dramatic scream, no broken glass, no scene that would have made sense in a movie. There was simply a woman sitting in a hospital bed, staring at the man she had loved for 8 years and realizing she no longer recognized him. "Were you ever going to tell me?" I asked. He looked up. "Yes." "When?" He hesitated. "After everything was settled." I almost smiled. "After the surgery?" He didn't answer. That was enough. I turned my face toward the window. Outside, people were walking through the hospital parking lot. Families were arriving. Nurses were moving between buildings. Cars were coming and going. The world looked completely normal. But mine had changed. I remembered the night before the surgery. I remembered holding his hand. I remembered telling him I would do it again if I had to. I remembered believing that someday we would look back at this terrible period and feel grateful that we had survived it together. Now I understood that I had been the only one fighting for that future. He reached for my hand. This time, I didn't pull away immediately. I let him hold it for a few seconds. Then I looked at him. "You know what hurts the most?" He was crying. "What?" "It isn't that you lied about being sick." He stared at me. "It isn't even that you were planning to leave." I slowly pulled my hand away. "It is that you watched me prepare to give you part of myself while knowing you were never going to give me the truth." He closed his eyes. I was afraid. So was I. I didn't know what else to do. "You could have told me. I thought you would hate me." "I do." He looked at me. I took a breath. "I don't hate you because you were afraid. I hate what you allowed your fear to turn you into." He didn't respond. A few hours later, Claire came to the hospital. For the first time, I saw the woman from the photograph in person. She looked nervous. She stood at the doorway as though she wasn't sure she had the right to enter. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe anger. Maybe jealousy. But when she looked at me, she began crying. I tried to stop it, she whispered. I nodded. "I know." She walked closer. "I should have told you everything sooner." "Why didn't you?" "Because I thought he would tell you." She looked at my husband. "He promised me he would." He looked away. Claire explained everything. She had known about his financial problems. She had discovered that he was hiding the true extent of his situation. She had confronted him weeks before the surgery and demanded that he tell me the truth. He refused. Instead, he convinced her that he was going to confess after the operation. When she realized he was lying, she started sending me warnings. The phone call 40 minutes before my surgery had been from her. The message I saw had been hers too. She had been trying to stop the surgery because she knew I was making a decision based on information that wasn't complete. I sat silently as she explained. Then she said something I would never forget. "I know you probably hate me." I shook my head. "I don't." She looked surprised. "You saved me from trusting the wrong person." She began crying harder. My husband looked at both of us. For once, he had nothing to say. The investigation into his financial activities continued. The truth eventually came out. The debts. The false statements. The money he had borrowed. the lies he had told. Everything became impossible to hide. But the legal consequences were no longer my responsibility. Neither was his recovery. For years, I had believed that loving someone meant staying beside them when they were at their lowest. I still believe that. But I learned something else. You cannot save someone who is determined to use your love as a hiding place. When I was discharged from the hospital, I didn't go home with him. I went to my sister's house. The first night there, I couldn't sleep. My body hurt. My marriage was over. And I felt like I had lost the future I had spent 8 years imagining. But sometime around 3 in the morning, I realized something. I was alive. I had survived the surgery. I had survived the betrayal. And I had finally learned the truth. Weeks passed. My recovery was slow. Some mornings were painful. Some days I felt angry. Other days I missed the man I thought my husband was. That was the hardest part. I wasn't missing the man who had betrayed me. I was missing the man I believed he had been. Eventually, the divorce began. He sent letters. He called. He apologized. He said he had made the biggest mistake of his life. He told me he still loved me. For a long time, I didn't respond. Then one afternoon, I received a final message. It said, "I know I don't deserve another chance, but I hope someday you can forgive me." I stared at it for several minutes. I could have answered. I could have told him exactly how much he had hurt me. I could have demanded explanations for every lie. But I realized I didn't need another conversation. I had already heard enough. So I deleted the message. Not because I had forgotten. Not because I wasn't hurt. But because I finally understood that closure doesn't always come from the person who broke you. Sometimes, closure comes when you stop waiting for them to explain why they did it. Months later, I returned to the hospital for a routine follow-up. I walked through the same corridor where everything had changed. I passed the room where my husband had sat beside me. I remembered the phone ringing. 40 minutes before I gave him my kidney. At the time, I thought that phone call was warning me about the worst moment of my life. Now I understood it differently. It had been the moment the truth tried to reach me. I simply wasn't ready to hear it. I stopped near the window and looked outside. I thought about the woman who had entered that hospital believing that love meant giving everything. She had been willing to give her husband a part of herself without asking what it would cost her. The woman standing there now was different. She still believed in love. She still believed people could change. She still believed marriage could be beautiful. But she also knew that love without honesty could become a prison. And sacrifice without respect could become self-destruction. I placed my hand gently over the scar beneath my ribs. That scar would always remind me of what happened. But it would no longer remind me of him. It would remind me that I survived. I had lost a marriage. I had lost the future I thought I wanted. But I had found something I had almost given away completely. Myself. And sometimes, the hardest goodbye isn't saying goodbye to the person you loved. It's saying goodbye to the version of yourself who believed you had to destroy your own life to prove that love was real. That was my last goodbye. Not to him. To the woman I used to be. And for the first time in years, I walked away without looking back.